The chandeliers dripped diamonds, but the air was thick with venom. For Alice Vaughn, this glittering gala wasn't a party. It was a battlefield. She was invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of her old life. Then she saw him, Richard Grayson, her ex-husband. The man who had taken her dreams, her company, and her name, leaving her with nothing. With his new trophy wife on his arm, he sneered, his voice cutting through the music. "Alice, what are you doing here? This is a party for somebodies. You're a nobody." But Richard didn't know who was watching. And in 5 minutes, a single gesture from the most powerful man in the room wouldn't just change her life, it would end his. The invitation had felt like a mistake, a cruel joke printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock. The Metropolitan Benefactors Ball. It was the beating heart of New York's elite, an event Alice had once helped organize, her name listed on the committee. Now she was only here because her best friend Sarah had a +1 and an iron will. "You have to go, Alice," Sarah had insisted, shoving a midnight blue velvet dress into her arms. "You've been hiding in that small studio apartment for a year. It's time to show them you're not broken." But Alice felt broken. A year ago, she wasn't Alice Vaughn. She was Alice Grayson, wife of the real estate mogul Richard Grayson, CEO of Grayson Holdings. Or rather, she was the silent, uncredited co-founder. She was the one with the architectural degree, the one who spent sleepless nights sketching the blueprints that launched his empire. He was the face, the salesman. She was the talent, the engine. And then he had replaced her. The divorce was a brutal surgical excision. His high-powered lawyers from the firm of Sullivan and Cromwell had painted her as a simple, supportive wife with no actual claim to the business she had breathed into existence. She walked away with a small settlement, her maiden name, and a silence so profound it felt like drowning. Now, standing in the grand ballroom of the plaza, she felt like an imposter. The air hummed with the sound of old money and new ambition. Women in Dior and Cartier jewels drifted past, their laughter like breaking glass. Alice clutched her simple beaded handbag, her only accessory, a pair of pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's. She kept to the perimeter, sipping champagne she couldn't taste, feeling the weight of 100 gazes that weren't even looking at her. "Alice, my God, is that you?" The voice was like fingernails on slate. Alice's blood didn't just run cold, it froze solid. She turned. Richard Grayson. He looked exactly as he always had, impeccable in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his dark hair artfully silvered at the temples. He radiated an aura of expensive cologne and ruthless success. On his arm was her Chloe, the new wife, a woman 10 years younger, draped in a backless gold dress that shimmered with every breath. "Richard," Alice said, her voice barely a whisper. Richard's eyes did a quick, dismissive scan. He took in her off-the-rack dress, her minimal jewelry, her nervous posture. A slow, cruel smirk spread across his handsome face. "I have to say, I'm stunned to see you here," he said, loud enough for the small circle of people nearby to turn. Chloe giggled, a high-pitched, empty sound. "My friend Sarah brought me," Alice said, trying to stand taller. "Sarah, ah yes, the legal aid lawyer. Commendable," Richard scoffed. He then leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous tone. "Listen, Alice, a word of advice from your old mentor." He gestured expansively at the ballroom, at the titans of industry and legacy families. "This is a party for somebodies, people who matter, people who build things." He paused, letting the insult land. You're a nobody. You don't belong here. You're embarrassing yourself." Every light in the room seemed to zero in on her. The music faded. All she could hear was the word, nobody, nobody, nobody. Chloe adjusted her diamond necklace, looking at Alice with a mixture of pity and triumph. "He's right, darling," Chloe chimed in. "This is A-list. You're just A." Alice's face burned. She felt the sting of tears but refused to let them fall. She wanted to scream about the late nights, the designs she had drawn, the foundation of his entire company that she had built with her own 2 hands. But the man who had called her his partner for a decade was looking at her like she was something he'd scraped off his shoe. "Excuse me?" Alice managed to choke out. She turned, pushing her way through the crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't see Sarah looking for her. She didn't see the sympathetic glances from a few onlookers. She just fled, pushing through the heavy doors onto the deserted terrace, the cold October air hitting her face like a slap. He was right. She was a nobody. She had nothing. The terrace overlooked Central Park, the city lights a cold constellation below. Alice gripped the stone balustrade, her knuckles white. The word nobody echoed in the wind. It wasn't just an insult, it was the story Richard had written for her. She flashed back to 12 years ago. She was Alice Vaughn, the top of her class at Columbia Architecture. He was Richard Grayson, a junior real estate broker with relentless charm and zero capital. He didn't just fall in love with her, he fell in love with her talent. "We're a team, Alice," he used to say, kissing her forehead as she hunched over a drafting table at 3 a.m. "You design them, I'll sell them." Her first project was a crumbling pre-war building in Soho. The investors only saw a liability. Alice saw its bones. She spent 6 months creating a revolutionary mixed-use design, preserving the historic facade while creating a breathtaking glass and steel atrium inside. Richard presented it as his own. Grayson Holdings was born from her mind. The Grayson Tower, his flagship skyscraper that redefined the downtown skyline, her signature cantilevered design. The exclusive Hamptons waterfront properties. Her innovative use of sustainable, eco-friendly materials. She hadn't minded at first. She was the quiet partner. She hated the spotlight, he craved it. It worked. Until it didn't. The more successful they became, the more she vanished. First it was Richard Grayson and his team. Then Richard Grayson. Finally he hired a new flashy team of young architects from Yale, and her input was no longer needed. She remembered the day she found the Cartier bracelet in his briefcase. It wasn't her anniversary. It wasn't her birthday. The divorce was a masterclass in gaslighting. "Your contributions, Alice, you were my wife. You offered opinions. That's what wives do." His lawyer, a shark named Stephen Blackwood, had argued in mediation. "You didn't sign a single contract. You aren't on the letterhead. You were a hobbyist." She'd been erased from her own life. Now standing on the terrace, she realized the terrible truth. Richard didn't just think she was a nobody. He had made her one. He had hollowed her out, taken the best of her, and built his monument of a life on her foundations. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere." Sarah rushed onto the terrace, her red dress a bright slash in the darkness. She saw Alice's face and her own fell. "Oh, honey, what happened? Was it Richard?" Alice nodded, the tears finally coming hot and angry. "He called me a nobody. He said I didn't belong." Sarah gripped her arms. "Listen to me, Alice. You are the most brilliant person I know. You are not a nobody. You're just dormant. That man is a parasite. He fed off you for 10 years and now he's starving." "He looks like he's thriving, Sarah." "He's not," Sarah said, her lawyer brain switching on. "I hear things. Grayson Holdings is over-leveraged. He expanded too fast into the Asian market right before the downturn. He's desperate. He needs a massive infusion of capital. That's why he's here tonight." "What do you mean?" "The guest of honor," Sarah said, pulling Alice back toward the door. "The white whale, Damian Sterling." Alice frowned. "The tech guy, Sterling Innovations?" "Not just tech," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. "Private equity, global investments. He buys and sells entire countries before breakfast. He's famously reclusive, but he's here. And he's rumored to be looking for a new legacy investment in New York real estate. Richard needs him. He's probably been practicing his handshake all week." A cold resolve began to settle over Alice, displacing the humiliation. "Richard is desperate," she repeated slowly. "He's bleeding," Sarah confirmed. "Now are you going to let that vampire chase you away? Or are you going to go back in there, hold your head high and watch him grovel?" Alice wiped her eyes. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the door. The simple blue dress. The pearl earrings. She was still Alice Vaughn. She wasn't a ghost. Not yet. "Okay," Alice said, her voice stronger. "Let's go watch him grovel." Returning to the ballroom was different this time. The humiliation was still there, a dull ache beneath her ribs, but it was now overlaid with a sharp, cold focus. Alice was no longer a ghost. She was a spectator. Richard was exactly where Sarah predicted he'd be, circling the main stage, his gaze fixed on the ballroom's main entrance. He was a shark sensing blood, but what Sarah had said was true. He was also a wounded shark. Alice could see it now. The smile was just a fraction too wide. The way he checked his Patek Philippe watch was too frequent. He wasn't relaxed. He was hunting. "He's so transparent," Alice murmured. "All ego," Sarah agreed, flagging down a waiter for 2 fresh glasses of champagne. "He can't stand not being the biggest predator in the room. But he isn't. Not tonight." As if on cue, a sudden hush fell near the entryway. The buzz of conversation didn't stop, but it dipped like a wave pulling back before a tsunami. The string quartet seemed to falter for a half-beat. A phalanx of subtle, dark-suited security men entered first. They didn't scan the room. They assessed it, their movements economical and unnervingly precise. And then he walked in. Damian Sterling. He was nothing like Richard. Where Richard was loud, Sterling was silent. Where Richard wore his success like a costume, Sterling wore his like a second skin. He was perhaps 40, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in the entire room in a single sweeping glance. He wore a simple black tuxedo, perfectly tailored, with no flashy watch, no diamond cufflinks. He didn't need them. He radiated a quiet gravitational pull. Power didn't shout. It was. The host of the event, an elderly philanthropist named Mrs. Astor, hurried to greet him. He bowed slightly, taking her hand with a grace that was almost old-fashioned. "That's him," Sarah whispered, practically vibrating. "He founded Sterling Innovations with $50,000 and a patent for a new type of data encryption. Now he's worth, well, estimates vary. 50 billion, 100. Richard, spotting his quarry, immediately began to move. He cut off Mark Jennings, the CEO of a rival firm, mid-sentence, and started shouldering his way through the crowd, Chloe trailing in his wake like a golden streamer. "Mr. Sterling!" Richard boomed, his hand outstretched. Damian Sterling turned, his expression unreadable. He looked at Richard's extended hand, then at his face. He didn't take the hand. "Mr. Grayson," Sterling said. His voice was quiet, a smooth baritone, yet it cut through the noise. "A true honor, sir. Richard Grayson, Grayson Holdings. I've been following your work in renewable tech. Fascinating." "Have you?" Sterling replied. It wasn't a question. He still hadn't taken Richard's hand. Alice watched, fascinated. Richard's smile wavered. He was being subtly, expertly, and publicly snubbed. "I believe," Sterling continued, his gaze drifting past Richard, "that the auction is about to begin, if you'll excuse me." He nodded once, a curt dismissal, and moved toward the head table, leaving Richard standing with his hands still awkwardly hovering in the air. Chloe looked furious at the slight. Richard's face flushed a dull, angry red. He slowly lowered his arm, his eyes narrowing. He hated being made to look small. "Ouch," Sarah muttered, sipping her champagne. "That's a cold shoulder from a man who could buy and sell him before the appetizer." And the lights dimmed, and the auctioneer, a jovial man named Charles, took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Your generosity tonight will help preserve the cultural landmarks of our great city." Alice and Sarah found a spot near the back by a large marble pillar. Alice watched the head table. Damian Sterling was seated, listening intently. Richard and Chloe were at a nearby table, Richard leaning in, whispering angrily to his wife. "And now," Charles announced, Our marquee item, the complete restoration of the long-neglected Hawthorne Conservatory in Central Park. A true gem of Victorian architecture left to decay. Until tonight, we will start the bidding at $500,000. Alice's breath hitched. The Hawthorne Conservatory. She knew it well. It was her passion project. Years ago, before Grayson Holdings was a behemoth, she had drawn up a full proposal for its restoration, presenting it to the city as a pro bono project. The city had loved it. Then Richard got his first major contract, a new high-rise. He needed the city to approve his zoning variances. He'd pulled her project, trading the conservatory's restoration for the political capital he needed. He'd let it rot all for a zoning permit. "A tragedy, that building," Sarah murmured. "Yes," Alice said, her voice tight. "It is." The bidding began. The bidding for the Hawthorne Conservatory was, as expected, a display of ego. $500,000, the auctioneer Charles began. A hand at a front table shot up. $600,000, Thal. 600, do I hear 7? 700,000, came a call from the side. Alice watched Richard. He was biding his time, letting the small fish tire themselves out. He leaned back, whispering to Chloe, a confident smirk back on his face. This was his territory. Real estate. Landmarks. He wanted to show Damian Sterling that he was New York. The bidding stalled at $1.2 million. Richard raised his paddle. $2 million, he declared, his voice ringing with authority. The room gasped. It was a jump bid designed to intimidate, to shut down the competition. Charles beamed. $2 million from Mr. Richard Grayson. A magnificent gesture. Do I hear 2.1? Silence. The other bidders lowered their paddles. Richard looked pointedly toward the head table, checking for Sterling's reaction. Sterling was impassive, watching the stage. "Going once," Charles called out. "Going twice. 2,500,000. The voice came from the back of the room. It wasn't a shout. It was a calm, clear statement from one of the auction's spotters' staff members who took bids from those who wished to remain anonymous. The room stirred. Who was counterbidding? Richard's smirk vanished. He looked annoyed. He'd been upstaged. 2,500,000 from an anonymous bidder, Charles announced, thrilled. "Mr. Grayson." Richard held up his paddle instantly. 3 million. He was angry now. This wasn't generosity. It was a turf war. 3,500,000, the spotter called out immediately without hesitation. A collective "ooh" swept the ballroom. This was a true fight. Richard was sweating. Alice could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. This was more than he'd intended to spend. He was financially exposed, but he was also publicly committed. Backing down now in front of Sterling was not an option. "Mark Jennings is watching him," Sarah whispered to Alice, gesturing to Richard's rival, who was grinning from ear to ear. "This is killing Richard." 3,700,000, Richard bid out. 4 million, the spotter replied instantly. Richard slammed his hand on the table. Chloe grabbed his arm. "Richard, stop," she hissed, her face pale. "It's too much." "I will not be beaten by a ghost," Richard snarled back. He stood up. $5 million. The room was dead silent. $5 million. It was an astonishing sum. Richard was breathing heavily, his face slick with sweat, but he looked triumphant. He had won. Charles looked at the spotter at the back. The spotter was listening to an earpiece, his face neutral. "Do we have a counterbid?" Charles asked, his voice trembling with excitement. The spotter nodded. "My bidder asks if Mr. Grayson is quite finished." The room exploded in laughter and gasps. Richard turned a shade of purple Alice had only seen once before, when a major deal in Shanghai had collapsed. "The bid," the spotter said, his voice cutting through the noise, "is $10 million. It was done." The number landed like a physical blow. Richard Grayson physically staggered, sitting down hard in his chair. He was defeated, utterly humiliated. $10 million! Charles yelled, banging his gavel. Sold to our magnificent anonymous bidder." The room erupted in applause. As the lights came up, Alice watched her ex-husband. He wasn't looking at the stage. He was scanning the room, his eyes frantic, murderous. Who had done this to him? Who had that kind of liquid capital and a reason to destroy him? His eyes swept the back of the room, passing right over Alice. He looked and he saw a nobody. Alice felt Sarah squeeze her hand. "My God," Sarah breathed. "Who was that?" Alice turned to her friend, and for the first time in a year she smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. "I have an idea," she said. The auction's conclusion left a chaotic energy in the room. The formal part of the evening was over and the real business networking had begun. But the only topic of conversation was the $10 million bid. Who was the mystery donor? Why the theatrical takedown of Richard Grayson? Richard himself was toxic. He was storming near the bar, Chloe trying and failing to placate him. "Find out who it was now," he was snapping at a frantic-looking assistant. "I don't care how. Check the donor list. Call Charles. I want a name." "He's unraveling," Sarah noted, taking a sip of champagne. "He's cornered," Alice corrected her. "That's when he's most dangerous." Alice felt a sudden desperate need for air. The victory felt good, but the tension was suffocating. "I'm just going to step out for a moment," she told Sarah. She made her way toward the terrace doors, keeping her head down, trying to avoid the main thoroughfares. She just wanted to be alone, but she didn't make it. "You." Richard's voice was low and guttural. He had seen her. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her skin, and dragged her into the alcove by the coat check, away from the main crowd, but still visible. "Richard, let go of me. You're hurting me." "Was it you?" He hissed, his face inches from hers. His eyes were bloodshot. "Was this some pathetic stunt? Did you and your little lawyer friend pool your savings?" "Don't be ridiculous," Alice shot back, yanking her arm free. "You think I have $10 million? I don't know what you have, but you were smiling. You enjoyed that. You enjoyed seeing me humiliated." "You humiliated yourself, Richard," Alice said, her voice cold. "You couldn't stand not being the center of attention. You were beaten. Get over it." His face twisted in rage. This was the real Richard, the one she's seen behind closed doors, the man whose ego was a black hole. "You worthless." He stopped, catching himself as a couple walked past. He lowered his voice again. "You think you're so smart. You're nothing. You came here in your little rented dress to feel important, but you're just a ghost. You don't exist. You are a nobody, Alice. You hear me? No. Body." He punctuated the last word with a sharp poke to her shoulder. "Mr. Grayson." The quiet baritone sliced through Richard's tirade like a chilled steel blade. Richard froze. He turned, his face still contorted with rage, which instantly drained to a slack-jawed panic. Damian Sterling was standing right behind him. He wasn't alone. His security detail was fanned out, creating a subtle, impassable barrier. Richard's transformation was instantaneous and grotesque. He went from predator to sycophant in a single breath. "Mr. Sterling," he gushed, straightening his tuxedo. "I was just, having a word with an old acquaintance." Damian Sterling's eyes were not on Richard. They were on Alice. He looked at her, his expression not cold but appraising, respectful. "I apologize for his behavior," Sterling said, his voice quiet, but carrying the absolute authority of a man who is never, ever questioned. Richard, seeing Sterling's focus, puffed up, desperate to reclaim the interaction. "Mr. Sterling, this is... well, she's nobody. My ex-wife. She's not... relevant." He extended his hand, again a desperate, sweaty offering. "As I was saying, my firm Grayson Holdings is perfectly positioned to partner with you on..." Damian Sterling ignored Richard's hand. He ignored Richard entirely. He stepped around Richard deliberately and completely, as if he were a piece of furniture. He walked the final 2 steps to Alice, who was standing frozen against the wall. The small alcove was suddenly the epicenter of the entire ballroom. Everyone was watching. Chloe from across the room had stopped her wine glass halfway to her lips. Mark Jennings was openly staring. Damian Sterling stopped in front of Alice. He took her right hand, the one Richard had grabbed. Then he did something that stopped the world. He bowed his head, a gesture of profound respect, and pressed his lips to the back of her hand. A collective audible gasp swept the room. It was not a romantic gesture. It was a coronation. It was the kiss of a king to a visiting queen. Richard Grayson's face, which had been red with rage, then pale with panic, now turned a chalky, sickly white. Damien Sterling straightened up, still holding Alice's hand. He looked at her with a small, appreciative smile. "Ms. Vaughn," he said, his voice resonating in the stunned silence. "It is an absolute honor to finally meet you in person. Your work is transformative." Richard Grayson looked as if he'd been shot. He stared at Damien Sterling, then at Alice, then back again. His brain was failing to compute the scene. You know her," Richard stammered, his voice cracking. She's a nobody." The unspoken word hung in the air. Damien Sterling finally turned his gaze to Richard. It was not an angry look. It was a look of utter dismissive contempt. It was the look a man gives an insect before he crushes it. "Mr. Grayson," Sterling said, his voice dangerously smooth, "you were married to this woman for a decade. Do you know anything about her at all?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned back to the room, which was now silent, everyone straining to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," Damien Sterling announced, his voice effortlessly commanding the space. "You have all been wondering about our generous anonymous bidder. You've also been wondering for the past 6 months about the identity of the mysterious AV, the architect who won the International Commission for the new Sterling Innovations European headquarters in London." Richard's eyes widened. The AV Commission was the largest architectural prize of the decade. It had been on the cover of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. Sterling smiled gently, raising Alice's hand. "Allow me to introduce you. This is Alice Vaughn, AV, the most brilliant architectural mind in a generation." The room exploded, not with applause, but with the frantic, high-pitched buzz of 100 separate shocked conversations. Reporters who had been there for the society angle suddenly became reporters, their phones held up recording. That's not possible," Richard whispered. She hasn't worked in a year." "No, Mr. Grayson, she hasn't worked for you in a year," Sterling corrected. "In that time, Ms. Vaughn founded her own firm, Vaughn Designs. She submitted her London proposal anonymously. It was chosen from over 500 entries by the world's top firms. It was chosen because it was perfect." Sterling then delivered the killing blow. "And yes," he continued, "Ms. Vaughn, on behalf of her new company, was the anonymous bidder tonight. Her $10 million pledge has not only saved the Hawthorne Conservatory, it has funded the exact restoration blueprints she herself designed and offered to the city 12 years ago. The same blueprints I believe your company had buried in exchange for a zoning variance. It was a total execution. Richard was no longer just a fool. He was a villain. He hadn't just insulted a nobody. He had tried to destroy the reputation of the new star of his own industry, the woman Damien Sterling himself had just endorsed. "But the money," Chloe stammered, finally finding her voice. "She can't have—" Sterling gave Chloe a look that made her physically recoil. "Ms. Vaughn's advance for the London project was substantial. $10 million is what she considers a generous donation. I assure you her liquidity is not a problem." Damien Sterling released Alice's hand. He looked at Richard, who was now trembling, his empire visibly crumbling in his eyes. "You know, Mr. Grayson," Sterling said in a conversational tone, "I've been looking at your company, Grayson Holdings. I was considering an acquisition. Your books are a mess. You're leveraged to the breaking point. You bet everything on a foreign market you didn't understand." Richard's face was ashen. This was his last hope, his pitch. "However," Sterling continued, "my primary holding company, Stratus Equity, recently acquired a controlling interest in the bank that holds your outstanding $300 million in debt, Atlantic Merchant Bank." If Richard was pale before he was a corpse now. Your entire company, Mr. Grayson, is now collateral on a loan that I personally hold. And I just learned tonight from your own mouth what kind of man you are. How you treat the talent that built you. I do not invest in nobodies. He turned to his head of security. Michael, call our people at Atlantic. Tell them to call Mr. Grayson's note, due in full, tomorrow, 9 a.m. Richard? Chloe shrieked true panic in her voice. Richard didn't respond. He simply stared at Alice, his eyes blank with horror. He was seeing it all, the late nights, the sketches, the talent he'd treated like a disposable resource. He hadn't just divorced a wife. He had discarded a genius. He had thrown away the one person who could have saved him. The world did not restart. The music did not swell. After Alice Vaughn had been crowned and Richard Grayson had been executed in the bloodless, brutal language of high finance, the ballroom simply fractured. The moment shattered, and the night's energy, once focused on a single point of humiliation, dissipated into 1,000 frantic whispers. Alice felt as if she were breathing for the first time in a year, her lungs expanding with an air so cold and clean it burned. She was aware of cameras flashing, no longer the soft pops of society photographers, but the harsh, predatory strobes of the press. She was aware of Sarah grabbing her hand, her nails digging in her friend's face, a mask of joyous, weeping disbelief. "AV?" Sarah screamed over the din, shaking her. "The London project, you... Oh my God. Alice. I know." Alice breathed the admission, tasting strange and new. I couldn't. The NDA. Damien Sterling's security detail, who had been shadows, materialized into a solid wall of dark suits. They moved with an unnerving fluid economy, creating a quiet perimeter around her. "Ms. Vaughn," the team leader Michael murmured, his voice barely audible, yet cutting through her shock. "Mr. Sterling suggests we exit through the service corridor. It will be quieter." Alice looked across the chasm that had opened in the room. Richard was still standing there, a statue of ash. His rival, Mark Jennings, who had just moments before been angling to poach her, was now simply staring at her, his expression one of pure, unadulterated calculation. He was no longer seeing an opportunity, he was seeing a competitor. But it was Richard she looked at. One last time. He was alone. Utterly. Chloe had not just stepped away. She had dissolved into the crowd, a golden shimmer vanishing from his orbit. His associates, the ones who had clapped him on the back for a decade, were now studying the chandeliers, the buffet, their own shoes, anything but him. He was a black hole, and the light was bending away from him. He was, she realized, a nobody. "Alice," Sarah whispered, pulling her focus. Go, I'll get your coat. I'll call you in an hour. Or tomorrow, just go." Alice nodded, numb. She let Michael, the security head, gently guide her by the elbow. They moved not toward the grand entrance, but toward a discreet wood-paneled door near the kitchens. Damien Sterling was waiting there, his overcoat already on. He held the door open. "A chaotic exit," he observed, his voice calm. "I apologize for the theatricality. It was not my intention to make a spectacle of you." "A spectacle of me?" Alice said, stepping out into the cool, concrete-scented corridor. "Mr. Sterling, what you did to him—" "What he did to himself," Damien corrected, his voice flat, all traces of boardroom performance gone. He was no longer the orator. He was the engineer. "He built a skyscraper on a cracked foundation. I simply provided the earthquake." They walked in silence, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the tiled walls, a stark contrast to the muffled luxury of the ballroom. They emerged onto a side street, 58th Street, where a single profoundly understated black Maybach waited its engine a silent hum. A driver in a simple suit opened the rear door. "My car will take you home, Ms. Vaughn," Damien said. It was a statement, not an offer. I can get a cab." "You cannot," he replied just as simply. "There are at least a dozen financial reporters currently swarming the front entrance of the plaza. Your face is, as of 10 minutes ago, the most valuable commodity in New York. You will not be getting a cab." She looked at him, the man who had just changed her entire world with 3 sentences. "Why?" She asked the question, small but heavy. "Why do all this the commission?" "Yes. But that was a public execution. You destroyed him." Damien paused, his hand on the car door. The streetlight caught the sharp intelligence in his eyes. "As I said, Ms. Vaughn," he replied, his voice a low, precise baritone, "I protect my investments. Your talent is my investment. But there's a simpler reason. I am an architect of a different kind. I build systems, data, finance, logistics. I despise vandalism." Vandalism. "He buried your plans for the conservatory," Damien said. "He let a masterpiece of Victorian design rot, trading it for a zoning permit. He took your genius and vandalized it for profit. I don't care for that. I don't care for it at all. Get in the car, Alice. You have a very, very busy day tomorrow." She got in. The door closed with a heavy soundproof thud, sealing her inside a tomb of black leather and silent absolute power. As the car pulled away, she looked out the tinted window. She didn't see Richard. She didn't see the party. She only saw the reflection of her own face, pale and stunned, looking back at her. At 8:51 a.m. the next morning, Alice Vaughn stood in the lobby of the Sterling Innovations Tower. It was not a building. It was a statement. A sheer black glass monolith that seemed to drink the morning light. She was wearing a new sharp navy blue suit from Theory, purchased at 8:10 a.m. from a department store that had just opened its doors. Her old life was in her small studio apartment. This was her new armor. At 9:01 a.m. she was escorted to the 80th floor conference room. It wasn't a room, it was the sky. 3 walls were glass, offering a godlike 270-degree view of Manhattan. Damien Sterling was already there, not at the head of the table, but halfway down. He was with 3 others. They all stood as she entered. "Ms. Vaughn, thank you for being punctual," Damien said. "This is Maria Flores, my general counsel. This is Dr. Kenji Tanaka, our head of engineering, and this is Robert Vale, head of global real estate." There were no congratulations. There was no mention of the gala, no talk of Richard, no gossip. There was only a 3D printed model of the London headquarters on the table. "Dr. Tanaka has concerns about the load-bearing capacity of the recycled graphene composites you specified for the atrium," Damien said, gesturing to the model. Alice put her briefcase down. She didn't look at Damien. She looked at Dr. Tanaka. "Your concern," she said, her voice clear and steady, "is based on the assumption that the load is static. It is not. The design uses a dynamic tensed truss system. The composites are merely a fairing. The load is carried by the tension cables as shown in blueprint A40 subsection D." Dr. Tanaka stared at her. He picked up a tablet, swiped through a file, and then a slow smile spread across his face. "Of course," he murmured. It's a suspension bridge. On its side. My God." Maria Flores, the lawyer, slid a thick portfolio across the table. "Ms. Vaughn, this is the finalized partnership agreement. As Mr. Sterling announced, Vaughn Designs is now the lead architectural partner for all Sterling real estate ventures present and future. This contract establishes an initial $50 million line of credit for staffing and operations independent of the London project's $20 million advance." Alice opened the portfolio. Her hands were shaking. Vaughn Designs, a company that 24 hours ago was just an LLC registered to a P.O. box. "And one last item," Robert Vale said, sliding a second thinner folder over. "The title transfer for the Hawthorne Conservatory. The $10 million pledge has been registered with the city. The site is officially yours as of 8:45 a.m. this morning. You can break ground whenever you are ready." Alice looked up from the papers at the 3 powerful professional faces and then at Damien Sterling. He was simply watching her, his expression neutral. He had given her everything. Her past, her present, and her future. At that exact same moment, 9:01 a.m., 20 blocks south, Richard Grayson was storming into the 40th floor boardroom of Grayson Holdings. "Get Stephen Blackwood in here now!" he roared. His tuxedo from the night before was on the floor of his office, and he was in a rumpled $5,000 chiton suit he had slept in. His CFO, a perpetually nervous man named David Chen, was already there, his face the color of putty. "He's on his way, Richard," David said, wringing his hands. The digital front page of the Wall Street Journal just dropped." He turned his monitor around. The headline was stark. "Sterling calls $300 billion note on Grayson Holdings. Shares halted." "He can't do that." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "It's a personal vendetta. It's illegal. Blackwood will sue him into the ground." "Actually," Stephen Blackwood said, walking in his briefcase, snapping open. The lawyer who had so ruthlessly dismantled Alice's claims now looked grim. "He can do that, and it is legal." "What?" Richard's bravado evaporated. "The covenants on your note from Atlantic Merchant Richard," Blackwood said, pulling out a document. "You were in technical default 3 weeks ago when your projections for the Shanghai Tower missed their Q3 target. The bank, which Sterling's equity firm now controls, had the right to call the note at any time for any reason. They just chose not to, until last night." "Fine, fine," Richard raved, pacing. "So we refinance. We'll go to Morgan Stanley. We'll go to Jennings, Mark Jennings. He'll buy us out. He hates Sterling. Call him." David Chen, the CFO, looked like he was going to be sick. He already called Richard. At 8:30 a.m. "See, good, what did he offer?" "He offered 50 cents on the dollar. Not for the company, for the debt. He wants to be your new creditor. He wants to own you, Richard, for sport." The blood drained from Richard's face. He was trapped. "We don't have the capital, Richard," David said, his voice a whisper. "The Asian market expansion, the new Miami Tower. It was all leveraged against that note. We're not just illiquid. We're insolvent. By noon, we'll be in receivership." "No," Richard whispered. "No. I built this. I built this." His assistant buzzed the intercom, her voice trembling. "Mr. Grayson, line 1. It's from Ms. Grayson. Her lawyer." Richard stared at the phone. He had completely forgotten about Chloe. He snatched the receiver. "Chloe, thank God. Listen, you need to call your father. I need him to—" "Mr. Grayson." A new voice, cold and sharp as a scalpel. "This is William Harding from the firm of Aronson, Stepp and Harding. I'm representing Ms. Chloe Grayson in her petition for divorce to be filed within the hour." "Divorce?" Richard laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "She can't. We've been married 6 months." "She is, and she will," Harding said, his voice bored. "We are citing gross financial mismanagement and the intentional dissipation of marital assets. Your performance last night has given us ample cause. We will be freezing your personal accounts, including the penthouse and the Hamptons property, pending a full audit. Do not attempt to contact my client. Goodbye." The line clicked. Richard Grayson stood in the center of his boardroom. The phone receiver hung limply from his hand. He looked at Blackwood. He looked at Chen. They were already packing their briefcases. "Where are you going?" he whispered. "To save what I can of my own career, Richard," Blackwood said, not unkindly. "You're radioactive, or I suggest you find a good bankruptcy attorney." "But the company, my name—" "The company is a carcass," Richard. David Chen said, his fear replaced by a sudden cold anger. "And Sterling, he's the vulture, and he's just getting started." Richard slowly sank into his high-backed leather chair. The chair he had bought after his first billion-dollar valuation. The chair he had been sitting in when he told his lawyers to give Alice the bare minimum. He stared out his window at the sweeping view of the city he had once claimed to own. Far in the distance, a new black glass tower pierced the sky. The Sterling Tower. He looked at it, and for the first time he understood. He hadn't been defeated by Damian Sterling. He had been defeated by Alice Vaughn. 3 weeks later, the Hawthorne Conservatory was a hive of activity. The chain-link fence, once covered in no trespassing signs, was now a gateway. Alice stood on the crumbling marble steps, her hard hat on a set of rolled-up blueprints in her hand. The decay was extensive, but the bones were magnificent. The original cast-iron trusses are sound, she was telling her new site manager. But the glazing. We'll need to replace every panel with the new smart glass. It will regulate the temperature and... Alice. The voice was a rasp. She turned. Richard was standing at the gate. He wasn't just disheveled, he was diminished. The power, the aura of expensive cologne and ruthless success was gone. He was just a man in a wrinkled suit that was now too large for him. He looked thin gray. "You're trespassing, Richard," Alice said, her voice even. Her heart didn't pound. Her hands didn't shake. She felt nothing, just a dull, final pity. "Alice, please," he said, walking toward her, his hands open in a gesture of supplication. I was a fool. I know that. I was arrogant. I was blinded by all of it. But it was always you." "Was it?" she asked, not moving. "Yes. Yes, you. You were the talent. You were the foundation. I see that now. I lost everything, Alice. The company, Chloe, the penthouse. It's all gone. They took everything." "No, Richard," she said, her voice quiet but carrying on the autumn breeze. "They didn't. You had everything. You had a partner who loved you and a talent that built you an empire. You gave it away. You didn't lose it. You threw it out." "But I can get it back," he said, a frantic, desperate light in his eyes. He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly weak. We can rebuild Grayson and Vaughn. Like old times, I'll work for you. I'll be your salesman. I'll do anything. I love you, Alice. I never stopped." It was his last pathetic card, the final desperate play of a manipulator who had run out of moves. Alice looked at his hand on her arm, then she looked into his eyes. She was searching not for the man she married, but for the man she had met, the charming, ambitious broker who had promised her the world. He was gone. There was no one home, just a hollowed-out echo, a ghost. She slowly, deliberately removed his hand from her arm. "No, Richard," she said, as one might speak to a child. "You don't love me. You love what I can do, and you can't have it any more. You bitch." He spat, the supplication vanishing, replaced by the familiar, ugly rage. "You did this. You and Sterling. You think you're so... Is this man bothering you, Ms. Vaughn?" A new voice, deep and calm, cut through his tirade. Two of her new foremen had walked up, their tool belts heavy, their expressions unamused. Richard froze. He looked at the two large men. He looked at Alice standing calm and protected, her blueprints in her hand. He had no power here. He had no authority. He had no name. "No, Miguel," Alice said, not taking her eyes off Richard. "He's just leaving, aren't you, Richard?" He stared at her, his face a mask of bitter, impotent hatred. He had called her a nobody, but he was the one who had been erased. Without another word, he turned, stumbled on the broken path, and walked out of the gate. He didn't look back. 6 months later, the sun was bright on a crisp spring morning. The Hawthorne Conservatory was no longer a ruin. It was a jewel box, its new smart glass panels glittering, its restored ironwork, a testament to a forgotten elegance. Alice Vaughn stood at a podium addressing the mayor, the press, and the city's cultural elite. "A building is not just steel and glass," she said, her voice confident, ringing with a passion that had been silent for a decade. "It's a foundation. It's a legacy. This was my legacy. A project I designed when I was just starting out. It was forgotten, buried. But the foundation was always strong. It was just waiting. waiting for someone to see it again. She looked into the crowd. Sarah was in the front row openly sobbing, and next to her in a simple dark suit was Damien Sterling. He was not looking at the stage. He was looking at her. His expression was not one of possession. It was one of profound intellectual and total admiration. After the applause died down and the reporters swarmed, Damien moved to her side. "A fine speech, Ms. Vaughn," he said. "Alice," she corrected him, smiling. "I think we're past the formalities, Damien." "Alice," he agreed. A small smile touched his own lips. "The London Tower's foundation was poured last week. Your projections were correct to the millimeter. You've impressed Dr. Tanaka. He's not easily impressed." "I'm glad to hear it," she said, rolling up her speech. "Thank you for this, for everything, for seeing me." "I just provided the resources, Alice," he said. "You provided the vision. You were always the architect." He looked at the restored conservatory, then back at her. "This is a magnificent achievement, a wonderful reclamation project." "It is," she agreed. "It's my favorite so far." "Good," Damien said, "because I'd like to propose our next one." Alice laughed. "Already the London site isn't even framed. What is it this time? A new headquarters in Tokyo? A research lab in Zurich?" Damien Sterling looked at her, and for the first time the engineer and the CEO receded, leaving just the man. "I was thinking dinner," he said, his voice a little softer. "This Friday, a joint venture, strictly non-architectural, a reclamation project for our personal lives." Alice looked at the man who had given her back her past, her name, and her future. She saw the most powerful man she had ever met, and he was, she realized, just a little bit nervous. She smiled, a real unguarded and brilliant smile. "Damien," she said, "I think that's a foundation we can definitely build on." And just like that, Alice Vaughn didn't just reclaim her name, she built an empire on top of the man who tried to bury her. She proved that the world may try to label you, to diminish you, to call you a nobody, but they can't steal what's inside you. They can't take your talent, your drive, or your resilience. Richard's story ended the moment his ego wrote a check his character couldn't cash. Alice's story was just beginning. What did you think of Alice's incredible comeback? Have you ever had someone underestimate you only for you to prove them wrong? Share your own stories of triumph in the comments below. We want to hear them. If you loved this story of drama and sweet revenge, please give this video a like. It really helps our channel. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. Most importantly, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss another one of our real-life stories. Thanks for listening.
He thought the greatest day of his life was the day she left. He saw her a year later, a ghost from his past, dressed in what he called pathetic simple clothes. He laughed, standing beside his glamorous fiancée, a woman draped in a one-of-a-kind designer gown that screamed wealth and success. But what he didn't know, what the whole world was about to find out, was that the woman he was mocking, his insignificant ex-wife Evelyn, hadn't just admired that dress. She had sketched it, stitched it, and created it. This is the story of how a man's cruel mockery became the spotlight for his own public humiliation. The air in the Corinthian ballroom was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It was the annual fundraiser for the Children's Foundation, a night where New York's elite gathered to outbid, outdress, and outshine one another under the guise of philanthropy. Arthur Penhaligon navigated the glittering crowd with the practiced ease of a man who believed he was born to be in such rooms. On his arm, a perfect accessory to his tailored Tom Ford suit, was Bethany Cole, his fiancée. Her laughter was like the chime of tiny expensive bells, and her presence turned heads, mostly because of the dress. The dress was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that seemed to drink the light of the chandeliers. It fell in a column, simple in its silhouette, but breathtakingly complex in its construction. A cascade of hand-stitched, gunmetal grey beadwork traced the line of her collarbone and wrapped around one shoulder, resembling a delicate frozen branch of a winter tree. It was elegant, exclusive, and whispered a price tag that would make most people gasp. Arthur was preening. Every admiring glance at Bethany was a victory for him. It was validation. He had traded up. He had won. And then he saw her. Across the room, near a less populated bar, stood Evelyn Reed, his ex-wife. It took him a moment to be sure. She looked different, smaller somehow. She was dressed in a simple charcoal grey sheath dress made of a soft matty fabric. It had long sleeves, a modest neckline, and fell just below her knees. Her hair was pulled back into a neat low ponytail, and her face was almost bare of makeup. Beside the shimmering peacocking crowd, she looked like a sparrow in a flock of birds of paradise. A nasty, triumphant smile curled Arthur's lip. Well, well, he murmured to Bethany, his voice a low thrum of condescension. Look what the cat dragged in. Bethany followed his gaze, her perfectly sculpted brows furrowing slightly. Who is that Evelyn? My ex-Arthur said the word ex, laced with a satisfaction that was almost palpable. Can you believe it? I haven't seen her since the divorce. Looks like life hasn't been too kind. He decided to approach her. It was a power move, a public demonstration of his new improved life. Bethany, sensing the drama, clung to his arm, a silent co-conspirator. Evelyn was speaking to the bartender when Arthur's shadow fell over her. Evelyn, he said, his voice offensively smooth. She turned, and her eyes, a calm, clear grey, met his. There was a flicker of surprise, but it was quickly masked by a polite, neutral expression. Arthur. She acknowledged, her voice even. She glanced at the woman on his arm. I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Bethany Cole, Arthur announced, practically puffing out his chest. Bethany, this is Evelyn Reed. A pleasure, Bethany said, her eyes doing a swift, dismissive scan of Evelyn's simple attire. The judgment was clear. You too? Evelyn replied, her gaze briefly falling on the midnight blue dress. A strange, unreadable emotion passed through her eyes before she met Bethany's gaze again. That's a stunning gown. Bethany brightened instantly. Oh, thank you. It's a custom piece from a new designer, Aura. Have you heard of them? Probably not. They're incredibly exclusive. It took my father's connections just to get a consultation. Arthur chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. I don't think Aura is on Evelyn's radar, darling. She always did favor minimalism. He gestured vaguely at her charcoal dress. Still keeping it simple, I see. Very practical. The insult was designed to sting, to remind her of every time he had criticized her for not being flashy enough, for preferring quality and comfort over loud brand names. During their marriage, he had constantly tried to mold her into a society wife. Buying her clothes, she hated pushing her into circles where she felt like an imposter. Her refusal, her quiet insistence on being herself, had been a major point of contention. Evelyn's composure didn't crack. She simply offered a small, tight smile. Practicality has its merits, Arthur. It lasts. So do investments. Arthur shot back pointedly, adjusting the cufflink that peeked from his sleeve. And I've always believed in investing in the best. Bethany looks like a queen, don't you think? She looks beautiful. Evelyn agreed, her voice still unnervingly calm. The lack of a wounded reaction was starting to irritate Arthur. He wanted to see a flash of envy, a hint of regret. He saw nothing. It was like talking to a placid lake. Well, we should be getting back to our table, he said, his tone dismissive. It was interesting seeing you, Evelyn. Try to enjoy the canapes. With a final triumphant smirk, he steered Bethany away, leaving Evelyn standing alone at the bar. My God, she was dreary, Bethany whispered once they were out of earshot. That dress looked like something my grandmother would wear to a funeral. You were married to that, a youthful mistake, Arthur said, waving a hand as if to erase the memory. She had no ambition, no understanding of how the world works. It's all about presentation, darling. Always has been. The life I have with you, this, he squeezed her arm, this is the life I was meant for. He glanced back across the ballroom. Evelyn was no longer at the bar. She had vanished back into the sea of anonymous faces, a plain grey stone swallowed by a glittering tide. He felt a surge of pride. He had shown her exactly what she had lost. He had stood before her, a titan of success, with a goddess on his arm, while she looked like a forgotten relic. He was completely, blissfully, and catastrophically unaware that the foundation of his entire triumphant moment, the very dress that symbolized his victory, was an intricate lie that was about to unravel his entire world. The Corinthian ballroom's opulence felt a world away from the quiet, ordered sanctuary of Evelyn's studio. Located on the third floor of a pre-war building in a district known more for its artisan bakeries than its high-fashion boutiques, the space was her haven. It was one large room with soaring ceilings and massive paned windows that flooded the space with the soft grey light of the city. One wall was covered in corkboard, a chaotic but meticulous collage of fabric swatches, charcoal sketches, and anatomical drawings of the human form in motion. Mannequins stood like silent sentinels, some bare others draped in muslin prototypes. Bolts of exquisite fabric, cashmere silk, charmeuse, and heavy wool crepe were stacked neatly on industrial shelving. The only sound was the gentle hum of her professional-grade sewing machine and the quiet scratch of a pencil against thick paper. Evelyn sat at her large drafting table, her back straight, the charcoal dress she'd worn to the gala still on. She wasn't designing, she was simply holding a pencil, staring at a blank sheet. The encounter with Arthur hadn't broken her, but it had left a deep, familiar ache. His words echoed in her mind, still keeping it simple. Very practical. He had always used the word simple like a weapon, equating it with unambitious and lacking. He couldn't comprehend that for Evelyn, simplicity was the ultimate sophistication. It was about stripping away the non-essential to reveal the perfect line, the flawless cut, the soul of the garment. It was a philosophy she had poured into her work, into her life, and into the very brand she was building. A key turned in the lock and the door opened to reveal Finn O'Connell, her business partner and fiercely loyal friend. He was a whirlwind of creative energy, with a shock of red hair that refused to be tamed, and eyes that sparkled with mischief and intelligence. He took one look at her rigid posture and the untouched sketchbook and knew. So he said, setting 2 cups of coffee on the table, "You saw him." Evelyn finally looked up, her grey eyes clouded. And his fiancée, Bethany Cole. Ah, the Cole heiress. Of coal, mining and minerals. Of course, Finn said, his tone dripping with disdain. He leaned against the table. Let me guess, he was a complete ass. A small, wry smile touched Evelyn's lips. He hasn't changed. He mocked my dress. Finn glanced at her charcoal sheath. The Clara. One of our best sellers from the ready-to-wear line. The one that sold out in 3 days on Net-a-Porter. That dress, the very same, Evelyn confirmed. He called it practical. Finn snorted. The man wouldn't know good design if it bit him on his perfectly tailored backside. What about the fiancée? What was she wearing? This was the question Evelyn had been dreading and anticipating. She took a slow sip of her coffee, the warmth a small comfort. She was wearing the Celeste. Finn froze his coffee cup halfway to his lips. He stared at her. The Celeste Wambig gown was not part of their ready-to-wear collection. It was a couture piece, a one-of-a-kind commission. It was the dress with the midnight silk and the hand-beaded gunmetal branch. It was to date the most ambitious, expensive and difficult piece their small atelier had ever produced. No, Finn whispered, a slow grin spreading across his face. You're kidding me. She was wearing the dress. The very same, Evelyn repeated, a hint of the night's strange irony finally bubbling to the surface. She was very proud of it. Told me it was by an exclusive new designer called Aura. Finn threw his head back and roared with laughter. It was a loud, joyous sound that filled the quiet studio, chasing away the lingering ghosts of the ballroom. Oh, that is rich. That is poetic justice of the highest order. The man who mocked your clothes is paying a fortune to drape his new toy in them. He has no idea, does he? None whatsoever. Evelyn said, the tightness in her chest finally beginning to loosen. Aura was her creation born from the ashes of her marriage. When she and Arthur divorced, she had taken her settlement, a sum he'd considered a paltry but fair price to be rid of her, and poured every cent into this studio. She had made a conscious decision to separate her name, Evelyn Reed, from her work. Her name was tainted by its association with him, by the society pages that had painted her as his dowdy, uninteresting wife. She wanted her designs to stand on their own, and so Aura was born. It was anonymous, mysterious. There was no face to the brand, only a philosophy, understated, luxury, impeccable craftsmanship, and timeless design. Finn handled the business and marketing masterfully, building a cult following based on whispers and exclusivity. They started with a small, ready-to-wear collection, sold through a few high-end online retailers. The pieces, like the Clara dress Evelyn wore, were praised for their quality and cut. The couture line was a new, more ambitious venture. They took on only a handful of commissions, vetted through a discreet agent. The client never met the designer. All communication went through the agent, ensuring Evelyn's anonymity. The Celeste gown for Bethany Cole had been their biggest commission yet. Evelyn had spent over 200 hours on the beadwork alone, her fingers raw, her eyes strained, pouring her pain, her resilience, and her artistry into every tiny stitch. The dress was a piece of her soul. "And you didn't say a word?" Finn asked, his eyes dancing. "Oh, to have been a fly on that wall. You just stood there and let him mock the Clara while his fiancée was wearing your masterpiece." "What was I to say?" Evelyn asked, her voice quiet. "Arthur, you colossal fool. You just paid a down payment on a condominium for the dress your fiancée is wearing. And it was made by me, the woman you called worthless." "Yes, that's exactly what you should have said," Finn exclaimed. "I would have paid to see his face." "No," Evelyn said, shaking her head. "That's his game. Public scenes, grand gestures, humiliation. My success has nothing to do with him. Aura's success is about the work. It has to remain that way." Finn's expression softened. He understood. This wasn't about revenge for Evelyn, not in the way Arthur would understand it. This was about reclamation. It was about proving to herself that the part of her Arthur had tried to extinguish her creativity, her quiet strength, was actually her greatest asset. "Okay, boss," he said gently, "but you have to admit there's a certain delicious irony to it all." "The irony is not lost on me," she admitted, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. She looked around her studio at the tools of her trade, the evidence of her hard work. This was her world, not the Corinthian ballroom, not Arthur Penhaligon's sphere of influence. She had spent years feeling small in his shadow. That night, for the first time, she realized she wasn't in his shadow at all. She was in her own light, a light so bright he couldn't even see it. He just saw a simple grey dress, while unknowingly basking in the glow of her true brilliant work. The game had changed, and Arthur didn't even know he was a player. In the weeks following the fundraiser, the name Aura became something of a mantra in the Penhaligon Cole household, or rather in the sleek, minimalist penthouse apartment Arthur had purchased in anticipation of his new life with Bethany. Bethany was obsessed. "They say she's a total recluse," she said one evening, scrolling feverishly through a fashion blog on her tablet. She was lounging on a vast white sofa that had cost more than Evelyn's first car. The designer. No one has ever seen her. Some people think Aura is a collective of European artisans. Others say it's the secret side project of a famous, established designer who wants to be more experimental. Arthur grunted from behind his laptop. He was reviewing market analytics. His brow furrowed in concentration. A major energy stock he'd bet heavily on had taken a sudden sharp downturn, and it was making him nervous. As long as they keep making dresses that make you look good. Who cares, he said, not looking up. I care, Bethany retorted, tossing the tablet onto the cushion beside her. It's about more than the dress, Arthur. It's about the story, the mystery. Genevieve Dubois just mentioned them in her latest column. She called Aura the most exciting new voice in couture. The name Genevieve Dubois made Arthur pause. Dubois was the editor-in-chief of Elan, the undisputed Bible of the fashion world. Her word could make or break a brand overnight. If she was praising Aura, then Bethany's dress wasn't just a dress. It was a cultural artifact. Good, he said, trying to sound pleased. That means your investment paid off. I want another one, Bethany declared. Arthur finally looked up from his screen. Another one, Bethany. That dress cost a fortune, and it was worth every penny I want Aura to design my wedding dress. Arthur's jaw tightened. The wedding was 6 months away, a lavish affair at her family's sprawling estate in the Hamptons. It was more than a wedding, it was a merger. The union of Penhaligon ambition and Cole old money. He was counting on the financial stability this marriage would bring him, especially now with his portfolio looking increasingly volatile. He needed to keep Bethany happy, but a custom Aura wedding gown, the cost would be astronomical. Darling, that's a wonderful idea, he said, forcing a smile. But you said yourself how hard it was to get the first one. Are you sure they even do wedding gowns? I've already had my father's assistant reach out to the agent. Bethany said, her tone triumphant. They're considering it. They want a design proposal and a full creative brief. They're playing hard to get, which only makes me want it more. Arthur felt a prickle of annoyance. He was a man who moved markets, who commanded respect. The idea of having to court some mysterious, faceless designer for the privilege of giving them an obscene amount of money was galling. It flew in the face of his entire worldview, where money and status were the keys that opened every door. It's just a dress, Bethany? He said, his patience wearing thin. No, it's the dress, she shot back, her voice rising. Don't you get it? This is our wedding. Genevieve Dubois will be there. Everyone will be there. I want to be wearing Aura. It says that we're on the inside, that we're ahead of the curve. Arthur sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He saw the logic in her argument. The wedding was a performance, and they needed the right costumes. An Aura gown would be a statement. It would cement their status as the city's new power couple. It was an investment in their brand. All right, he conceded. All right, see what their agent says. He returned to his laptop, but his concentration was broken. He thought back to the night of the gala, to Evelyn in her drab little dress. The contrast between her and Bethany had been so satisfying. Evelyn represented his past, quiet, unassuming, and in his mind utterly devoid of the hunger required to succeed. Bethany was his future, bright, bold, and draped in the very definition of success. Yet there was a nagging dissonance. Evelyn's calmness at the gala had been unsettling. She should have been devastated. She should have looked up at him with longing and regret. Instead, she had looked at him with something that almost resembled pity. It was absurd. What could she possibly have to pity him for? His phone buzzed. It was a market alert. The energy stock had dropped another 4%. A knot of cold dread tightened in his stomach. He was more exposed on this position than he'd let on to anyone, even Bethany. He had leveraged other assets to increase his stake, sure of a quick and massive return. It had been a gamble, a move to secure the kind of wealth that would finally place him beyond the reach of the old money snobbery of families like the Coles. Now that gamble was threatening to blow up in his face. He looked over at Bethany, who was once again lost in her tablet, happily pinning ideas for her Aura-designed wedding. Her family's fortune was the safety net he was counting on. The wedding couldn't just happen. It had to be perfect. Her happiness was paramount. Suddenly, the Aura dress wasn't just a frivolous expense anymore. It was a critical component of the plan. It was the price of keeping the dream alive. Find out what they need, he said, his voice harder than before. Whatever the cost, whatever they want, get it done. Bethany looked up, a radiant smile on her face. I knew you'd understand. He didn't understand. Not really. He didn't understand the obsession, the mystery, or the power this invisible designer held. He just understood that in his world, which was beginning to show faint but terrifying cracks, appearances were everything. And the appearance of success, symbolized by a dress from a designer named Aura, was something he desperately needed to maintain. The name Aura began to spread through the elite circles of New York like a secret language. It was a whisper at cocktail parties, a name drop in the front rows of Fashion Week, a tag on the most exclusive social media accounts. The mystery surrounding the designer only fueled the brand's meteoric rise. Aura wasn't just fashion, it was a phenomenon. Finn was a master at stoking the flames. He orchestrated a series of calculated leaks and placements. A renowned actress was photographed at LAX wearing an Aura cashmere travel set looking effortlessly chic. A French heiress was spotted in St. Bart's in a deceptively simple Aura linen sundress. Each piece was instantly recognizable by its cut and quality, yet devoid of any logo. The lack of branding became the brand. Then came the feature in Elan. Genevieve Dubois dedicated a full 2 pages to Aura, not with flashy photographs, but with elegant prose and artistic sketches of the designs. The article, titled "The Architecture of Silence," was a love letter to the brand's philosophy. In an age of deafening logos and celebrity-driven spectacle, Dubois wrote, "Aura is a radical act of quiet confidence." The anonymous designer, rumored to be a single, fiercely private artisan, is not selling a name but a feeling. The garments are an intimate conversation between fabric and form. To wear Aura is not to scream, "Look at me," but to command attention with the sheer force of impeccable construction and understated grace. This is not fashion for the masses. It is armor for the discerning, a secret shared among those who understand that true luxury doesn't need to shout. Evelyn kept a copy of the magazine open on her desk. She had read the article a dozen times, each time feeling a thrill that was entirely her own. Armor for the discerning. Dubois understood. She understood what Evelyn was trying to do. The success was both exhilarating and terrifying. The demand was exploding. Finn was fielding calls from major department stores, from stylists, from investors, wanting to buy a piece of the mystery. "We're at a crossroads," Finn said one afternoon, pacing the studio floor. "We can't stay a 2-person operation forever. The ready-to-wear line needs to scale up or we'll be crushed by the demand. And the couture requests are insane." The crown princess of a minor European nation wants a gown for the royal wedding. Evelyn felt a wave of vertigo. A princess. It was all happening so fast. "We're not ready for that kind of expansion, Finn. The quality is everything. If we scale up too quickly, we lose what makes Aura special." "I know," he said, stopping to look at her. "Which is why we need to be strategic. I've found a small family-owned atelier in Italy that can handle a larger production run of the ready-to-wear line. The quality is superb. It would free you up to focus purely on the couture and the core design." It was a sensible solution, but Evelyn hesitated. It meant letting go, trusting others with her vision. It was another step out of the shadows and into a much larger world. Meanwhile, Arthur Penhaligon was also reading Genevieve Dubois' article. He'd found it on Bethany's nightstand. He read the words, "Quiet confidence, understated. Grace doesn't need to shout," and felt a strange sense of cognitive dissonance. They were concepts he associated with weakness, with his ex-wife. How could they possibly be the description of the world's most coveted luxury brand? It didn't compute. To him, luxury was a megaphone. It was a Bugatti, a Patek Philippe, a front-row seat. It was loud, but the world, at least this influential corner of it, was telling him he was wrong. "Did you see?" Bethany asked, coming into the room, wrapped in a silk robe. "She called us the discerning." She had completely co-opted the brand's identity as her own. In her mind, by wearing aura, she was aura. I saw Arthur said, closing the magazine. Their agent has been in touch, by the way. Bethany squealed with delight. And what did they say about the wedding dress? Arthur felt a familiar pang of annoyance at having to report the news. They're particular. They've agreed to consider the commission. But they have terms. Terms? What terms? First, a non-refundable design deposit of $50,000, just to create the initial sketches. Bethany didn't even blink. To her, it was a rounding error. To Arthur, whose finances were becoming more precarious by the day, it was a gut punch. Second, he continued, his voice tight. The designer, Aura, insists on a private meeting with the bride, alone, to understand her essence before beginning the design process. A meeting? Bethany gasped. A real meeting? With Aura? Oh my God, Arthur. No one gets to meet Aura. I'll be the first. What will I wear? What will I say? She was already spiraling into a vortex of excited preparation. Arthur, however, was stuck on the absurdity of the situation. This phantom designer was now dictating terms to him, summoning his fiancée, like a queen summoning a courtier. The meeting is to be held at the designer's private atelier, he added, reading from the agent's email on his phone. No photographs, no companions, and the location will only be disclosed 24 hours in advance. A non-disclosure agreement is required. It's all so mysterious, so chic. Bethany swooned. This is perfect. Absolutely perfect. Arthur watched her, a cold feeling creeping up his spine. The world was changing, and the rules he had always played by seemed to be shifting under his feet. Power, he was discovering, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was silent. Sometimes it was a mysterious, unseen woman who could command a $50,000 deposit for a sketch and summon the city's most sought-after heiress to a secret meeting. He hated it. He hated the feeling of not being in control. But he was trapped. He needed the Cole family money, and the price of that was Bethany's happiness. And the price of her happiness was now inextricably linked to this ghost named Aura. Unbeknownst to him, in a quiet studio across town, the ghost was preparing for the meeting. Evelyn stood before a mannequin draped in ivory silk. She was sketching not a wedding dress, but a plan for a conversation. She felt a strange sense of calm. She wasn't nervous about meeting the woman who had replaced her. She was curious. This wasn't about revenge. It was about research. Bethany Cole was the embodiment of the world Arthur had wanted Evelyn to be a part of. To design the ultimate dress for her, Evelyn needed to understand that world, not as an outsider, but from the inside. She needed to understand the woman Arthur had chosen. She needed to understand what he valued. And in doing so, perhaps she could finally fully understand why he had never valued her. The day of the meeting arrived cloaked in a shroud of secrecy that Bethany found thrilling and Arthur found deeply irritating. A black car dispatched by the Aura agent arrived at their penthouse precisely at 2 o'clock. Bethany, having spent the entire morning agonizing over her outfit, finally settled on a Dior pantsuit, powerful but respectful, and emerged looking like she was about to negotiate a corporate merger. "I can't believe you're not allowed to come," she said to Arthur, for the 10th time adjusting the collar of her jacket. "Just remember what we talked about." Arthur said, his tone that of a coach sending a player into the big game. "Be charming, emphasize the prestige of the wedding, the guest list. Make sure this Aura person understands that this isn't just any commission, it's a career-making opportunity." Bethany rolled her eyes. "I think Aura is already doing just fine, Arthur. Try not to worry. I'll be back in a few hours, hopefully, with a wedding dress in the works." She kissed him on the cheek and swept out of the apartment. Arthur watched from the window as the black car pulled away, a small, dark vessel disappearing into the city's vast circulatory system. He felt completely powerless, a feeling he utterly despised. He paced the length of his living room, the polished floor reflecting his agitated form. To distract himself, he decided to do what he did best: investigate. He opened his laptop and typed Aura Designer Atelier location into the search bar. The results were, as expected, fruitless. Message boards were filled with speculation, but there was no concrete information. The brand's digital footprint was a masterclass in controlled anonymity. Frustrated, he called a man he knew named Patrick, a private investigator he occasionally used for discreet corporate due diligence. Patrick was expensive, but he was good. Patrick Arthur said, his voice clipped. "I have a small personal project for you. It's time sensitive." "Name it," came the gruff reply. "A fashion brand. Aura. I want to know who is behind it. I want a name, an address, a history, everything. Aura." Patrick sounded surprised. "That's a tough one, Mr. Penhaligon. They're famously airtight." "Everyone has a weakness," Arthur snapped. "Follow the money. The corporate filings. The agent they use. The car service they hired today. I want an answer by the end of the day." "It'll cost you," Patrick warned. "Just get it done," Arthur said, and hung up. Meanwhile, Bethany's car was weaving its way out of the familiar territory of Midtown and into a neighborhood she rarely, if ever, ventured into. The skyscrapers gave way to older, more uniform buildings of brick and stone. The storefronts changed from global luxury brands to independent bookstores and small artisanal shops. The car finally stopped in front of an unassuming grey stone building with a discreet black-painted door. There was no sign, no plaque. A woman in a simple, elegant black dress was waiting. "Miss Cole," she asked politely. "This way, please." Bethany was led through the door and up 3 flights of stairs. The air grew quieter with each step. The woman opened a final door and gestured for Bethany to enter. "Aura will be with you shortly." Bethany stepped inside, and the door closed softly behind her, leaving her alone. The room was breathtaking. It was not the opulent, velvet-draped salon she had imagined. It was a working studio, vast, airy, and filled with light. Bolts of fabric were stacked like a library of textures. Sketches were pinned to a wall. Mannequins stood in thoughtful poses. The room smelled of clean linen charcoal and something floral like jasmine tea. It felt sacred. She wandered deeper into the room, running her hand over a bolt of heavy silk. The quality was undeniable. She saw a dress in progress on one of the mannequins, a column of deep emerald green, its seams pinned with surgical precision. This was a place of serious work. "Miss Cole, thank you for coming." The voice was quiet, calm, and came from behind her. Bethany turned. Standing there was a woman. She was dressed simply in tailored black trousers and a soft, cream-colored cashmere sweater. Her hair was pulled back, and her face was intelligent and serene. She looked familiar, but Bethany couldn't place her. There was an air of quiet authority about her, but she wasn't what Bethany had expected at all. She had pictured some flamboyant, eccentric artist. This woman was composed. "You're Aura?" Bethany asked, a little thrown. "I am the designer behind Aura," the woman said with a small, polite smile. She did not offer her name. "Please have a seat. Can I offer you some tea?" They sat in 2 simple but elegant armchairs near the large windows. The woman Aura poured tea into delicate ceramic cups. She moved with an unhurried grace that Bethany found both calming and slightly intimidating. "Your celestial magic gown was a pleasure to create." Aura began, her voice smooth and even. The beadwork was inspired by the hoarfrost on winter branches. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever owned," Bethany said, meaning it sincerely. Everyone was captivated by it. "Good design shouldn't captivate," Aura corrected gently. "It should liberate. It should feel like the purest version of yourself." She looked at Bethany with discerning eyes. "Tell me about the wedding, not the venue or the guest list. Tell me how you want to feel on that day." The question caught Bethany off guard. No other designer had ever asked her that. They asked about silhouettes, necklines, fabrics. They asked about trends. Arthur had told her to talk about status, about making a statement. But this quiet, intense woman was asking about her feelings. For the next hour they talked, or rather Bethany talked. Prodded by Aura's insightful, gentle questions, she found herself speaking not just about the wedding, but about her life. She spoke of the pressure of being a Cole, the constant expectation to be perfect, to be dazzling. She admitted that sometimes the galas and the parties felt like a performance, and that she wasn't always sure who she was when the costume came off. She had never spoken this way to anyone, least of all to Arthur. The designer listened patiently, her grey eyes watchful and intelligent. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words were perceptive, cutting through the noise to the heart of the matter. "It seems to me," Aura said finally, as the light outside began to fade, "that you are caught between wanting to be a monument and wanting to be a woman. The world expects you to be a monument. Your dress should allow you to be a woman." Bethany stared at her mesmerized. "Yes," she whispered. "That's it. That's exactly it." As she was leaving, feeling lighter and more understood than she had in years, a thought struck her. The designer's face was still naggingly familiar. "Have we met before?" Bethany asked at the door. Aura's calm expression didn't waver. "I'm not a very social person. I doubt our paths would have crossed." The answer was smooth, definitive. Bethany let it go. Back in the penthouse, Arthur was pacing like a caged tiger. His phone finally rang. It was Patrick. "You're not going to believe this," the investigator said, a note of genuine surprise in his voice. "Aura is registered as a sole proprietorship. I had to pull property deeds and utility records for the atelier address the car service dropped at. The owner of the brand, the sole designer, the woman who owns that studio, her name is Evelyn Reed." Arthur froze. The world tilted on its axis. "What did you say, Evelyn Reed? As in your ex-wife?" Arthur sank onto the sofa, the phone slipping from his numb fingers and clattering onto the marble floor. Evelyn, Evelyn Dreary, simple, practical Evelyn. The woman he had mocked, pitied, and discarded. It was impossible. It was a joke, a mistake. But as the pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed, he knew it was true. Her hobby, her quiet nature, her strange, placid reaction at the gala. Her comment, "Practicality has its merits. It lasts." And the dress, the celeste gown, his symbol of triumph, of trading up. He had paid his ex-wife, the woman he considered a failure, a small fortune to make his new fiancée look like a queen. The humiliation was so profound, so complete, it felt like a physical blow. Just then, the door opened. Bethany swept in, her face glowing. "Arthur, it was incredible. She's a genius, an absolute genius. You should have heard the things she said. She gets it. She gets me," she gushed. Arthur looked at her, at the woman he was pinning all his hopes on, and all he could see was the ghost of his wife. He had sent Bethany into the lion's den, and she had come back calling the lion a visionary. "She's going to design the dress," Bethany announced, beaming. "And Arthur, I think it's going to be the most beautiful dress in the world." Arthur couldn't speak. He just stared, his mind a maelstrom of rage, shock, and a dawning, sickening sense of dread. The trap had been sprung, and he had walked right into it. The weeks leading up to the Metropolitan Fashion Vanguard Awards were a blur of activity for everyone involved, though for vastly different reasons. For Evelyn, it was a period of intense, focused creation. After her meeting with Bethany, she had designed a wedding dress that was, by all accounts, a masterpiece. It was not the monumental, attention-grabbing gown Bethany thought she wanted. Instead, it was a study in vulnerability and strength, made of a heavy liquid silk crepe that moved like water. It had long, clean lines, a dramatic sweeping back, and sleeves so delicately embroidered with tiny seed pearl blossoms that they seemed to have grown there. It was a dress for a woman, not an heiress. Bethany had wept when she saw the sketches. But beyond the wedding dress, bigger news was brewing. Genevieve Dubois, having championed Aura from the beginning, had used her considerable influence. Aura was to be presented with the Emerging Designer of the Year award at the upcoming Vanguard ceremony, the most prestigious event on the fashion calendar. The one condition of accepting the award was that the designer behind Aura would finally have to reveal their identity. Finn had argued for it passionately. "This is it, Ev. This is the moment. You can't stay a ghost forever. You've built the foundation. The work speaks for itself. Now it's time to claim it. It's time for Evelyn Reed to take a bow." Evelyn, after much soul-searching, agreed. It was time. Her anonymity had served its purpose. It had protected her, allowed her to build her business on merit alone. Now, stepping into the light felt less like a risk and more like a final necessary step in her own liberation. For Arthur, those same weeks were a private hell. The knowledge that Evelyn was Aura festered inside him like a poison. Every excited mention of the brand from Bethany, every gushing compliment about the mysterious designer's genius was a fresh twist of the knife. He was trapped in a farce of his own making. His fiancée was idolizing his ex-wife, and he was footing the bill. His financial situation had also worsened. The energy stock had collapsed, wiping out a significant portion of his capital. He was now more dependent than ever on his marriage to Bethany. He couldn't afford to rock the boat. He couldn't expose Evelyn without exposing his own foolishness, without destroying Bethany's happiness, and with it his own financial salvation. So he said nothing. He smiled, he nodded, he played the part of the proud, supportive fiancé, while inside he was consumed by a helpless rage. He tried to subtly poison the well. "Are you sure about the dress, darling?" he'd ask. "It seems a bit simple in the sketches." "It's not simple." "Arthur, it's sublime." Bethany would counter completely under Evelyn's spell. Aura says that true elegance is quiet. The words were Evelyn's, and hearing them from Bethany's lips was a unique form of torture. The night of the Vanguard Awards arrived. It was the social apex of the season held at the Museum of Modern Art. The red carpet was a river of flashbulbs and couture. Arthur stood stiffly beside Bethany, his smile a tight, painful rictus. Bethany was a vision. She was wearing another custom Aura creation for the event, a gown of shimmering, pewter-colored silk, elegant and striking. She was once again the center of attention. "Isn't it thrilling?" she whispered to him as they took their seats in the grand auditorium. "They say Aura is going to be revealed tonight when she accepts her award. We'll finally get to see her." Arthur felt a cold sweat prickle his brow. He knew what was coming. He could have warned Bethany, could have saved her the public shock. But a dark, selfish part of him wanted her to feel the same humiliation he felt. If he was going down, he wouldn't go down alone. The ceremony began. Awards were presented, speeches were made. Finally, Genevieve Dubois took the stage to present the award for Emerging Designer of the Year. The room fell silent. There are moments in fashion. Genevieve began, her voice resonating through the auditorium, when a new voice emerges that is so clear, so confident, and so utterly original that it changes the conversation. This year, that voice belongs to Aura. A montage of Aura's designs flashed on the giant screens. The actress at the airport, the French heiress, and finally, a stunning editorial shot of the Celeste gown. Bethany gasped and squeezed Arthur's arm. "That's my dress." "Aura has reminded us," Genevieve continued, "that craftsmanship is not old-fashioned, that silence can be more powerful than noise, and that a garment's true value lies not in its label, but in its soul." The designer built this brand from the ground up on her own terms, letting the work speak for itself. She is a testament to resilience, to the quiet power of artistry in a world obsessed with fame. Arthur felt his collar grow tight. Genevieve was telling Evelyn's story, his story, but from a very different perspective. "It is my profound honor to announce that the winner of the 2025 Emerging Designer of the Year award is Aura, and the incredible woman behind it, Ms. Evelyn Reed." The name hung in the air for a moment. There was a smattering of confused applause. Evelyn Reed. The name was unfamiliar to most. And then, from a side aisle, Evelyn emerged. She was wearing a simple, exquisitely cut black jumpsuit of her own design. Her hair was down, falling softly around her shoulders. She looked poised, confident, and serene. She looked nothing like the drab, defeated woman Arthur had painted in his memory. She looked like a creator, a powerhouse. The camera projecting her image onto the screens panned for reactions in the audience. It found Bethany Cole. Her jaw was slack, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked from the screen to the stage, and then to the man beside her face a mask of confusion. And then, the camera found Arthur. His face was pale, his expression frozen in a silent scream of utter abject horror. The two shots, the shocked fiancé and the humiliated ex-husband, were broadcast for the entire fashion world to see. Bethany turned to him, her eyes flashing with a million questions. But before she could speak, Evelyn reached the podium. She looked out at the crowd, her calm, grey eyes sweeping over the room until for a brief, searing moment they met Arthur's. There was no triumph in her gaze, no malice. There was only a quiet finality. She leaned into the microphone. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Thank you, Genevieve and the Vanguard Committee. They say to build something new, you first have to tear down the old. I'd like to thank my ex-husband, Arthur Penhaligon. He taught me through his own actions the profound importance of self-worth. He was the one who first showed me that judging a woman by the simplicity of her clothes is a fool's game. Because you never know. She might have designed the dress your fiancé is wearing." A collective gasp went through the auditorium. It was a perfectly delivered, devastatingly elegant coup de grace. Every eye in the room swiveled from Evelyn on the stage to Arthur and Bethany. Bethany looked down at her pewter gown as if it had caught fire. The humiliation was absolute, public, and inescapable. She stared at Arthur not with confusion anymore, but with the cold, hard light of dawning comprehension and utter betrayal. Arthur didn't see her look. He was just staring at the stage, at the woman he had so casually discarded. She hadn't just built an empire from the ashes of their marriage. She had used his own arrogance as the blueprint. And she had just unveiled her masterpiece on the biggest stage in the world, leaving him buried in the rubble. The aftermath of the Vanguard Awards was a nuclear winter for Arthur Penhaligon. The story was simply too juicy to be ignored. It had everything: a scorned wife's triumphant return, a clueless heiress, and a pompous, arrogant husband receiving his public comeuppance. The gossip columns and fashion blogs feasted on it for weeks. They called it the Aura Affair and the Penhaligon Predicament. Photos of Arthur's horrified face and Bethany's shocked expression were juxtaposed with images of Evelyn's serene, powerful acceptance speech. The ride back to the penthouse was a silent, glacial affair. Bethany sat on the far side of the limousine, her arms crossed, her aura gown, looking like a cruel joke. Arthur tried to speak, to formulate a defense, but the words wouldn't come. What could he say? "I'm sorry I mocked my ex-wife while secretly making you her biggest patron. I'm sorry, I'm a fool." When they arrived, Bethany didn't even look at him. She walked straight to the guest bedroom and locked the door. The next morning, her father, a formidable man, with cold, calculating eyes, arrived with two of his lawyers. The meeting was short and brutal. The engagement was off. All financial ties between the Coles and Arthur were severed. Mr. Cole made it icily clear that Arthur's name was now poison in their world. The wedding, the merger, the financial safety net, it all vanished in an instant, left alone in the sterile white penthouse that now felt like a mausoleum. Arthur's world fully collapsed. The loss of the Cole fortune meant his creditors, who had been patient in anticipation of his marriage, came calling. The leveraged bets on the energy stock became an anchor, pulling him down into a sea of debt. Within 3 months, he was forced to sell the penthouse, his car, and his collection of expensive watches. The Tom Ford suits were replaced by off-the-rack replacements. The Titan of finance was reduced to a cautionary tale whispered at the same parties he used to command. He saw Evelyn one last time months later. It was a chance encounter on a busy street. He was rushing to a job interview for a mid-level analyst position. She was stepping out of a black car, looking effortlessly chic in a camel-colored aura coat on her way into a building that probably housed her new expanded headquarters. Their eyes met across the sidewalk. He saw no pity, no gloating. He saw nothing at all. To her, he was just a man in a crowd, a ghost from a past she had long since moved beyond. That indifference was more painful than any hatred could ever be. Evelyn's world, in contrast, was dawning. Revealing her identity had been like throwing gasoline on the fire of her success. Aura, now attached to the compelling story of Evelyn Reed, became the most sought-after brand in the world. Investors lined up, but she chose her partners carefully, retaining full creative control. She opened a flagship store in Soho, a minimalist temple to her design philosophy. She accepted the commission from the European princess. Her brand became synonymous with intelligent, empowered luxury. She never spoke of Arthur publicly again. Her speech at the awards had been the first and last word on the matter. It wasn't a story she needed to tell. It was a foundation she had built upon. One evening, months after the awards, she was in her new larger studio working late. The space was beautiful, overlooking the city lights. Finn came in with 2 cups of tea, a ritual that had remained unchanged. "The final numbers for the quarter are in," he said, setting a cup on her desk. "We've exceeded our projections by 200%. "That's good," Evelyn said, smiling, but her eyes were on a sketch in front of her. "Just good," Finn teased, leaning against the desk. "Ev, we're building an empire." She looked up at him, her grey eyes clear and bright. "We're building beautiful things, Finn. That's what matters." She took a sip of her tea. "The empire is just a happy consequence." He watched her for a moment, the woman he had seen at her lowest, now so firmly at her highest. Her success wasn't a revenge story, he realized. Revenge is a hot, messy, finite emotion. This was different. This was a story of creation. She hadn't focused on destroying Arthur's world. She had been too busy building her own. His collapse was merely a side effect of her rise, a shadow cast by her growing light. Evelyn looked out the vast window at the glittering cityscape. She had once felt so small in this city, invisible beside a man who demanded all the light for himself. Now she knew the truth. The brightest light doesn't need to be demanded. It simply needs to be created. And from now on, she would be the one to create it. And so Arthur Penhaligon became a footnote in Evelyn Reed's incredible story. He learnt the hard way that a person's worth is not defined by the label on their clothes, but by the substance of their character and the strength of their spirit. Evelyn's triumph wasn't just in her success, but in her refusal to become like the man who wronged her. She found her power not in public revenge, but in the quiet, undeniable excellence of her work. Her story is a powerful reminder that the people we underestimate are often the ones with the most extraordinary things to show the world. What did you think of Evelyn's ultimate comeback? Was it a perfect act of poetic justice, or would you have wanted a more direct confrontation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives. If this story of quiet triumph and self-made success resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who appreciates a story of true empowerment. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another real-life drama that will leave you thinking long after it's over. Thank you for listening.